Okay, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, well, I rarely sit at my desk. I'm always walking around.
I find that when I have kids working in groups, the idea of like going to everyone seems so overwhelming. But then once you start, you realize how quickly you can actually move through the groups.
Do. Give your example.
But one of the things I found is that getting the kids to make up their own questions, and I write just model 2 on the board, and then they have to make up their ones that were similar. It was so easy because then they had to work on those 6 questions, but I was able to move around the classroom and get to every single kid just to see that they were doing what they were doing, and even stop and help 3 kids. So I didn't have a ton of books to mark at the end, and I actually find that I'm taking home less work at night because I'm giving that feedback right away, and it's making it so much easier.
Well, remember I told you about the time I had them with chart paper, had kids sitting on the floor, and they were going through their questions, and I was able to get around to all the groups. And I did ask them for their feedback as well, if this type of activity worked, and they thought it was great.
But not only that, no, I'm not only finding out it's better with time and better able to get around to the kids or work with a small group, but I also find out too, because you're getting the kids to make up their own questions and come up with their own numbers that they want to use. I'm not photocopying. I'm not photocopying a ton of stuff because, yes, it's a little bit harder because every kid comes up with different numbers. So you don't have that quick answer there.
Yeah.
But that's like the differentiated piece,
That's
right?
right. But it still gives me that time to get around because they're thinking of the numbers they want to use. So think of an integer between -10 plus 10. Add them. Show me using the models. And just even practicing the models on the table. We've been doing models on the table, number lines on the table. And then I'm not photocopying, and then they just transfer.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the question now on assessment. What do you do?
But I can make notes of it.
The feedback you do, right?
Yes, the feedback.
Yeah.
Then I can do the anecdotal.
So what are you doing though about the evaluation, though, about the rubric piece?
I feel though I like to use that idea of like success criteria and not
Right.
necessarily like a formal rubric.
Yeah.
Because as long as they're meeting the curriculum expectation, then
And that's
does it matter how they meet it? Like that's I don't know.
And that was kind of where we went today with Christy, right? Like that's where it was going, was that. But how much do you think the kids need to see through? Like I know they're seeing the rubric come at least the end,
Yes.
and probably sometime else in between. They were probably getting more rubrics before, right? Because you were always collecting, but they know better about where they're at because you're always giving them feedback.
Yeah.
Like when I spoke to them today, they're way better.
Quicker.
Way better.
But not only that, but even if I don't come quicker, I could even still write on their book, shows an excellent understanding.
Right.
Shows some understanding, you need a little bit more practice.
They're getting
I can
way more
quickly
feedback.
Write that on the book than taking the books and having to go home and take them home
in
at
the
night.
practice too of I always have the success criteria up on the board and I have them have copies. So and even if like we're working on a project and it won't be assessed for like 3 or 4 periods or whatever it is, I keep going. Go back to like so it's no surprise. Like they know from the very beginning what I expect at the end.
One of the things I want to do though is that according to Christian, she was talking about where the inquiry is going based on assessment.
Yes.
Is now the next step is to get them to keep that portfolio so that they pull out the pieces that they want me to assess. And to me, that's the next big step.
And that was where I started
That's
that
the big
today.
step.
No, it was perfect because we were just starting our social studies. So I can start it like relatively, like they've had maybe one activity, but not much, right? So I can kind of start at the very beginning with that, where I said, you are responsible for keeping all of that stuff. And there's going to be those more formalized check-ins where it's like, okay, prove to me that you've mastered this. And that's where they're going to have to give that piece, and they're going to get possibly the full rubric, possibly the success criteria piece, right?
Yeah.
But they're getting it in a more formalized way at multiple check-in
and
points.
that's the one I have to work on more because I still grapple with that a bit, and I still like play around with that. Like one of the ones that she also mentioned, and we've been doing that with our math tests and our math assessments, is giving them 3 or 4 choices on like, so here's the expectation you're supposed to learn. Here's 4 questions on that. Do any 2.
Right.
So they still show me they have a choice to show me the question that they can do based on expectation. But it just means that your test is like, even if you do a test, it's gonna be a little bit longer because then you have the choice on there. But you're providing them the choice like try this question or this question.
But could you also make like and maybe that's not the choice. See, I did something like that where I even just the open-ended piece of the test, right? Where it was kind of, you had mentioned about pulling the numbers that were theirs. That was kind of like the thing too. Like maybe either A, pulling the numbers for one, or B, something like show me something that has a sum between this range, right? So again, people could choose accordingly, some of which might do something with regrouping and some of which wouldn't, right? So if everyone could kind of show it there,
you know what?
which
I
was
just
in a
think
testing, but
we just have to realize and get our heads around the fact that it's a journey, and we're now starting on a journey. And as we go along and talk to each other more, or talk to other people, you're going to pick up more and more and more about it, and then you're going to try things, and everything's not going to work. But that's why it's part of the journey, because everything will not work. But then you use that, and you give yourself that feedback, or get the kids to give you feedback. What do you think about this lesson? What suggestions would you have if you do it again? Right?
Well, I'm being okay with doing it wrong. Like when I did the social studies one today, I said to them, I'm going back a step because I said I didn't like where we got the last class, and it wasn't because you did something wrong. It's because I left it too open-ended. There was nothing wrong with your questions, but they weren't getting us to where we needed. They weren't getting us to where we needed to go. So therefore, I needed to make a change, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the piece too, right? Is being okay with saying that part too.
Yeah.